In the film Girl with the Pearl Earring, Johannes Vermeer poses what I consider to be one of the most profound questions ever asked about painting. What color are the clouds? It is a deceptively simple question, but it completely changes the way we begin to think about color. Because once we stop seeing color as a fixed property and begin seeing it as a relationship, many of the painter's most powerful tools start to reveal themselves. Today's study is in many ways about one of those tools, underpainting, also referred to as pre-shading. At its core, underpainting is founded on a deceptively simple idea, that the colors beneath a surface continue to influence the colors above it. Traditional painters employed closely related approaches for centuries, often beginning with an imprimatura or monochrome underpainting before gradually building color through transparent glazes. Rather than merely covering what came before, these layers interacted with one another, creating a depth and luminosity that emerged from the relationship between the colors themselves. Underpainting rarely exists in isolation. To better understand its influence, I will deliberately strip away some of the techniques that would normally accompany it and focus on the principle itself. I grabbed an old Gretchin box containing 10 Gretchin and a Runtherd. With a new 11th edition Armageddon just around the corner and a new wave of Gretchin on the horizon, this felt like the perfect moment to revisit these wonderfully scrappy old classics. Since I want to showcase 5 different approaches to underpainting, the little gits have been organized into pairs. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Grobnik and Snackrod, Drips and Snacker, Work and Blim, Snip and Crackluck, and Grimsnick and Rodgrop. Naturally, their long-suffering, ever-watchful and reportedly rather ill-tempered Runtherd Gorzak will also have his own special place in this video. We begin with Grobnik and Snackrod. These two receive a rich, somber violet as their underpainting. One of the most overlooked aspects of underpainting is the relationship between the foundation and the hues layered above it. The choice of those hues has an enormous influence on the atmosphere and final character of the surface. There is of course no objectively right or wrong approach here, but I find it important to develop a clear sense of the final color mood early on in the process. For Grobnik and Snackrod, I wanted to preserve the cool and slightly mystical quality of the violet foundation. I therefore began with a very dark blue-green, acting as a cool counterweight within the greens. To strengthen the green character further, I gradually introduced a more saturated midtone. From there, a far more vibrant and luminous green begins to enhance the unnatural radiance of the skin. Before an almost fluorescent final highlight pushes the brightest areas even further. The result creates a beautiful arc between the deep violet underpainting and the almost toxic glow of the final greens. By the way, a more detailed tutorial with the exact colors I used along with additional useful tips as well as numerous other tutorials on various topics related to the miniatures hobby and the art of miniature painting can be found on my Patreon page. Link in the description. As a contrast to the somber mystical violet of our previous pair, Drips and Snacker now enter the scene with a vivid orange underpainting. With these two we move into much warmer chromatic territory. To build upon that warmth without losing the green character of the skin, I begin with a pale and slightly juicy green tone. Notice how the orange foundation subtly pushes the following hues into a far more vibrant and organic direction. I did not want to drift too far into different green territories with these two, so the progression remains relatively restrained. A brighter and more saturated green therefore becomes both the third and final step in the sequence. Throughout the entire process I continuously mix a small amount of the previous color into the next one on the palette whenever appropriate. This gradual transition between layers is essential for creating smooth and cohesive color relationships across the skin. If you would like a deeper look into this approach, I cover the principle in more detail in my technique focus episode on glazing. I am very happy with the final result, which brings us to our next pair. Work and Blim receive a deep crimson pre-shade, establishing a strong tonal contrast between the later greens. With these two we move slightly back across the color wheel into far more earthy and olive-driven territory. For the first and foundational green of the skin I chose a muted olive tone. This is followed by a slightly lighter and softer green, helping to preserve the subdued and natural character of the skin while gently increasing the luminosity. At this stage the skin still lacks some brightness, so an even lighter olive hue is introduced to push the upper volumes further. Finally, a pale khaki tone completes the highlights and fully establishes the tonal contrast of the skin. Snip and Crackluck receive a rich mid-tone blue pre-shade. In contrast to the olive-heavy greens of our previous pair, these two move into far cooler and more melancholic chromatic territory. To build upon that atmosphere, I begin with a dark blue-green foundation. This is followed by a clearer and more balanced mid-green, helping to brighten the skin while preserving the cool undertones established by the pre-shade. Finally, a much lighter and more vibrant green completes the highlights and brings this dynamic duo to its final stage. Grimsnick and Rodgob complete our little Gretchin gang, beginning with a wonderfully vibrant turquoise blue foundation. To preserve that striking chromatic relationship, the first green layer remains equally vivid and saturated. This combination creates an almost glowing, fantasy-like quality across the skin, very similar to the atmosphere that originally inspired my arbitrary color studies. Much of this effect comes from the close chromatic relationship between turquoise and green, allowing the underlying hues to softly vibrate through the layers above them. Finally, our trusted pale green returns once more to complete the highlights and fully establish the luminous character of the skin. Underpainting is often treated as a purely technical step or simply a means to establish fast contrast. For me, however, it is equally about the relationship between colors and the atmosphere they create together across the miniature. aspect of underpainting that I rarely see discussed is the deliberate reintroduction of the underlying tones later in the painting process. Even with a brush, it is possible to carefully reinforce certain lines, transitions and recesses with traces of the original foundation color, subtly weaving those hues back into the surface. Of course, the gang would not be complete without their Runtherd. Rather than relying on a single underpainting tone, Gorzak receives 3 different pre-shades across the skin. By allowing multiple underpainting tones to interact across the body, the skin gains a far greater sense of depth and variation. To achieve this, I divided the skin into 3 main segments. The lower areas begin with a deep crimson foundation. Moving upward, the middle section shifts into orange tones, especially around the face and finer features where I wanted the pre-shading to remain particularly luminous. Finally, a cool turquoise blue introduces a subtle temperature contrast across selected areas of the skin. The main green layer begins with a strong and classic mid-green, before gradually transitioning into a lighter and more vibrant tone. As before, the surrounding layers are softly mixed into one another on the palette to maintain smooth and cohesive transitions throughout the skin. To give Gorzak a tougher and more leathery appearance, shaped by long years of breeding Gretchin and settling disputes the old-fashioned way, I introduce a pale olive green highlight across the more weathered areas of the skin. Finally, I revisit a few remaining tones from the Gretchin palette itself to add small but lively accents throughout the model. With that, Gorzak's motley mob of grots is complete. Beneath all that green we have worked with violet, orange, red, blue, turquoise and countless transitions in between. Perhaps the most interesting thing about underpainting is that it teaches us to look beyond the color we think we are seeing. Just as clouds are rarely simply white, green skin is rarely simply green. Thank you all for watching and until next time, have fun!